The research vessel Meridian broke apart like a toy crushed by an angry child. Dr. Alara. Vance felt the ship shudder around her as alarms screamed through every corridor and emergency lights painted the walls in shades of angry red. She had been sleeping in her quarters when the first explosion rocked the vessel and threw her from her bed onto the cold metal floor. Now she ran through smoke-filled hallways while the ship died around her. All personnel to escape pods. The computer announced in its calm artificial voice that seemed wrong for such a terrible moment. Hull breach on decks 7 through 12. Reactor containment failing. All personnel to escape pods immediately. Alara pushed past fallen equipment and stumbled over debris as she made her way toward the nearest pod bay. She could hear screaming somewhere behind her and the horrible groan of metal twisting in ways it was never meant to twist. The ship was falling apart, and she was going to die in the cold emptiness of space unless she reached that pod. She turned a corner and found the pod bay doors jammed halfway open. Through the gap, she could see the last remaining escape pod still locked in its cradle. The others were already gone. Launched by crew members who had been faster or closer or simply luckier than her. Alara squeezed through the gap and felt something sharp tear at her arm. Pain exploded through her left side, but she kept moving because stopping meant dying. She fell into the pod and slammed her good hand against the launch controls. The pod rocketed away from the Meridian. Just as the reactor finally gave up its fight, Alara watched through the tiny viewport as the ship that had been her home for 3 years became a flower of fire blooming against the stars. Then the pod systems detected the nearest planet and began its descent toward a world that the ship's database had classified as Category Omega. Category Omega meant death. Category Omega meant a planet so hostile that no survey team had ever returned from its surface. Category Omega meant Kethros 4. A world filled with predators that existed only to hunt and kill and feed. The pod hit atmosphere and Alara screamed as fire wrapped around the tiny vessel and shook her like a giant trying to break open a nut. Her broken arm slammed against the wall, and she nearly passed out from the agony. Through the viewport she could see violet clouds rushing past, and below them a forest that sparkled like it was made of glass or crystal, or something equally strange and beautiful. The pod crashed through the top of the crystal forest, and Alara heard the sound of 1,000 wind chimes shattering as the trees broke beneath her falling vessel. Then everything stopped. She lay in the ruined pod for a long time, listening to her own breathing and the strange singing sounds the broken trees made as wind moved through them. Her left arm was definitely broken, and her head felt fuzzy and wrong. But she was alive. Alara forced herself to move, to push open the pod's cracked door and crawl out onto alien soil. The ground beneath her was covered in what looked like purple grass that bent away from her touch as if it was afraid. Above her, the sky was turning orange as the planet's sun began to set. She had maybe 2 hours before darkness fell, and according to everything she had read about Kethros 4, darkness was when the predators became most active. She pulled herself to her feet and looked around at the crystal forest that surrounded her. Crash site. The trees were beautiful in a terrifying way, their trunks made of something that looked like smoky quartz and their branches spreading out in patterns that reminded her of frozen lightning. They made sounds she could almost but not quite hear, vibrations that tickled the edge of her perception. Her medkit had survived the crash, and she used it to splint her broken arm with shaking hands. The pain medication helped a little, but not enough. She was alone on a death world with nothing but basic survival supplies and injuries that would have sent her straight to a medical bay on any civilized planet. The first predator appeared at the edge of the clearing. Just as the sun touched the horizon, it was a 6-limbed creature about the size of a large dog, covered in scales that shifted colors as it moved. Its head was dominated by 8 eyes, arranged in 2 rows of 4. and all of those eyes were fixed on her. Alara froze. The creature watched her for a long moment, and then made a sound like bones scraping together. Another one appeared beside it, and then another, until 5 of the stalker creatures stood at the tree line, watching her with their many hungry eyes. They were waiting for something. Then Alara remembered what she had read about Kethros 4 and felt her blood turn to ice. The ion storms. This planet experienced massive electromagnetic storms that swept across its surface every few days. And during those storms, the native predators went into a feeding frenzy. Something about the electromagnetic interference affected their brains and drove them into a state of mindless aggression. The survey teams that had tried to explore this world had all died during the storms, torn apart by creatures that hunted not for food, but simply because the chaos in the air demanded blood. Alara looked at the sky and saw the first flickers of green lightning in the gathering clouds. A storm was coming, and she was trapped in a clearing surrounded by predators that would soon lose whatever small restraint kept them from attacking. More creatures emerged from the forest as the light faded. She saw serpentine things that moved like shadows given form, their bodies impossibly long and covered in what looked like black feathers. She saw something massive pushing through the trees on the far side of the clearing, a creature that resembled what might happen if a bear and a spider had a nightmare. Together, its body was covered in chitinous plates that clicked and shifted as it breathed. And it was easily 3 times her size. The stalkers, the serpents, the bear spider thing, and a dozen other creatures she could not even begin to describe, all gathered at the edges of her small safe space and watched her with eyes that held intelligence and hunger in equal measure. They were waiting for the storm, and when it arrived, they would tear her apart. Alara pressed her back against the ruined pod and tried to remember how to pray. She had 17 hours until rescue was even possible. She would not survive 17 minutes. The first true lightning strike turned the entire sky a sickly shade of green that reminded Alara of poison. Thunder rolled across the crystal forest, and the trees responded with a symphony of ringing tones that hurt her ears and made her teeth ache. The predators began to change. She saw it happen. In the stalkers first, those 6-limbed creatures with too many eyes that had been watching her so patiently. Their scales began to flash with bioluminescent patterns, pulses of light racing across their bodies in frantic rhythms that had no order or sense. They started pacing back and forth at the edge of the clearing, their movements growing jerky and aggressive as the storm's electromagnetic chaos invaded their minds. The serpentine creatures rose up from their coiled positions and began to writhe in ways that looked painful, their feathered bodies twisting as if they were trying to escape their own skin. They made sounds now, high-pitched keening noises that cut through the thunder and spoke of madness. And the bear spider, that massive horror of chitin and muscle, had started to slam its armored head against a crystal tree over and over again. Each impact sent shards of glittering material flying through the air and produced a sound like a gong being struck by a hammer. It was hurting itself. Alara realized with sick fascination the storm was driving it so crazy that it was hurting itself. Just to feel something other than the electromagnetic fire in its brain, soon they would stop hurting themselves and start hurting her. She could see it building, could see the moment approaching when their pain would transform into rage, and their rage would demand a target. She was the only soft thing in this clearing, the only creature not made of scales or chitin or shadow. She would be so easy to destroy. Alara closed her eyes and tried to think of home. She thought of her mother's kitchen on a rainy Sunday afternoon. The smell of coffee and the sound of music playing softly from the old radio her mother refused to replace. She thought of being small and scared during thunderstorms, hiding under blankets while the sky roared outside her window, and she thought of her mother sitting beside her and singing, her voice soft and warm and steady. turning the thunder into nothing more than background noise for a lullaby. Her mother had died 3 years ago. Just before Alara had joined the Meridian's crew, she had not sung since the funeral. But now, with death circling her in the form of alien monsters driven mad by a storm she could not escape, Alara opened her mouth and began to sing. Her voice cracked on the first note, and she had to start again. The song was an old one, a lullaby her mother had learned from her mother who had learned it from hers, passed down through generations of women who had used it to comfort crying children and ease worried hearts. Hush, little baby. Do not say a word. The words felt strange in her mouth. After so long without using them, Mama's going to buy you a mockingbird. Lightning struck so close that she could smell burning ozone and feel the heat of it against her skin. The thunder that followed was loud enough to shake loose memories she had tried to bury, but she kept singing. And if that mockingbird will not sing, Mama's going to buy you a diamond ring. One of the stalkers had stopped pacing. Alara noticed it through her half-closed eyes, saw the creature standing perfectly still while its companions continued their frantic movements. All 8 of its eyes were fixed on her, and its head was tilted to one side in a gesture that looked almost confused, like it was trying to understand what she was doing, like it had never encountered anything like her voice before. She kept singing, moving through the verses of the lullaby while the storm raged overhead and the predators slowly lost their minds. By the time she reached the end of the song, 2 more stalkers had stopped to listen. They stood beside the first one, their bioluminescent patterns still flashing, but somehow slower now, less frantic, more like a heartbeat than a seizure. Alara did not know any more verses to that lullaby, so she started it over from the beginning, and then she noticed the serpents. They had stopped their painful writhing and had coiled together in a pile, their bodies intertwined and their heads raised toward her. Their eyes were still wild, but they were not moving, not attacking, not doing anything except listening to her sing. Something was happening. Something impossible was happening. She moved from the lullaby into another song, something her grandmother had taught her during long summer visits to a farm that no longer existed. It was a hymn about grace and redemption, and she did not believe the words, but she remembered the melody, and that was enough. Bear Spider had stopped slamming its head against the tree. It turned toward her with movements that seemed almost gentle. Compared to its earlier violence, ichor dripped from wounds on its armored face where it had cut itself on the crystal bark. But it made no sound of pain as it settled onto its haunches and watched her. All around the clearing, the predators were growing still. The storm continued to rage, green lightning splitting the sky and thunder shaking the ground. But the creatures that should have been tearing her apart were instead sitting in a circle around her and listening to her sing. Alara's voice was growing hoarse, and her throat hurt from the effort of projecting over the storm. But she did not dare stop. She cycled through every song she could remember. Lullabies and hymns and pop songs, and even a sea shanty that a crewmate named Marcus had taught her during a long night shift. She sang about love and loss and hope and home. She sang about things that mattered to humans and could not possibly matter to alien predators on a world that had never known the sound of a human voice. But they listened hour after hour. Through the worst of the storm, they listened and they did not attack. Alara did not understand what was happening, but she understood one thing with perfect clarity. If she stopped singing, she would die. So she kept singing, even when her voice became a rasp, even when her throat felt like she had swallowed broken glass, even when she ran out of songs and had to start over from the beginning. She sang to the monsters, and the monsters let her live. The storm showed no signs of stopping, and Alara had been singing for what felt like forever. Her voice was nearly gone now, reduced to a whisper that she had to force out through a throat that burned like fire. But she did not stop. She could not stop. The predators had crept closer as the hours passed, moving inch by inch toward her position against the ruined escape pod. At first, she had been terrified by their approach, certain that each small movement was the beginning of an attack, that they never lunged at her, never bared their teeth or extended their claws. They simply moved closer and settled down again, their eyes never leaving her face, their bodies growing still as they listened. The great bear spider was only 3 meters away now. She could see the individual plates of its chitinous armor, could count the dozens of small eyes that dotted its massive head. It had wounds on its face from where it had hurt itself earlier. Dark ichor dried in streaks across its alien features, but there was something in those eyes that was not hunger or madness. There was something that looked almost like peace. One of the stalkers had moved even closer. Close enough that Alara could have reached out and touched it if she had been brave enough or foolish enough to try. It lay flat against the purple grass with its 6 legs tucked beneath its body, looking less like a predator and more like a dog waiting for its owner to continue a pleasant activity. Its 8 eyes blinked slowly, out of sync with each other, and its bioluminescent patterns had settled into a gentle pulse that matched the rhythm of her songs. The serpents had arranged themselves in a spiral pattern near the edge of the clearing, their feathered bodies rising and falling with slow breaths. They had stopped making those terrible keening sounds, and now they were silent except for a soft hissing. That might have been contentment. Alara realized with sudden clarity what was happening. The electromagnetic storm was still raging overhead, still sending waves of energy that should have been driving these creatures into a killing frenzy. But her singing was somehow cutting through that chaos. The steady rhythms of human music, the predictable patterns of melody and tempo, were acting like an anchor for brains that had been set adrift by the storm. She was giving them something to hold on to, something to focus on instead of the madness. It was like the eye of a hurricane, she thought. All around them the storm screamed and roared. But here in this small clearing, with her broken voice and her remembered songs, there was calm. The lightning struck particularly close, and the thunder that followed was loud enough to make her ears ring. Alara's voice faltered, catching on a note she could not quite reach with her damaged throat. Immediately she heard a sound from the closest stalker, a low keening noise that vibrated through its entire body. It was distress. It was a creature in pain, begging her without words to please keep going. Please do not stop. Please give us something to hold on to in this storm. Alara forced herself to continue, pushing through the pain in her throat and the exhaustion in her body. She hummed when she could not sing, whispered when she could not hum, mouthed the words when even whispering became too much, and the predators stayed with her. More had arrived as the night went on, drawn perhaps by some signal she could not perceive, or simply stumbling upon this island of calm in the electromagnetic chaos. There were creatures she had not seen before, things with too many legs and things with no legs at all, things covered in fur and things covered in what looked like living metal. They came to the edge of the clearing, and they stopped, and they listened. By midnight, there were dozens of them surrounding her, the most dangerous predators on one of the most dangerous planets in the known galaxy. And they were all perfectly still and perfectly peaceful because a single human woman was singing lullabies in a voice that barely existed anymore. Alara had never felt so scared in her entire life, and she had never felt so powerful. These creatures could kill her in an instant, could tear her apart before she even had time to scream. But they chose not to because she was giving them something they needed, something they could not get anywhere else on this storm-racked world. She was giving them silence inside their own heads. She thought about all the times these storms must have swept across this planet, driving these intelligent creatures into madness over and over again. She thought about the fear they must feel when they see those green clouds gathering on the horizon, knowing what is coming, knowing they will lose control of themselves. She thought about how lonely it must be to have a mind that can be stolen from you by nothing more than lightning in the sky, and she felt something that surprised her. She felt compassion. These were not monsters. She realized these were beings who suffered, who feared, who fought against something they could not defeat. And tonight, for the first time in their evolutionary history, they had found a way to survive the storm with their minds intact. They had found her. Alara reached out with trembling fingers toward the nearest stalker. The creature did not move, did not flinch, did not show any sign of aggression. She touched the scales on its head and felt them shift under her palm. Warm and smooth and surprisingly soft, the stalker made a sound, a low rumbling that vibrated through its body and into her hand. It was not a threatening sound. It sounded almost like a cat purring. Alara laughed. A broken sound that hurt her throat but felt good anyway. Here she was on a death world, surrounded by apex predators, petting an alien creature during an electromagnetic storm that should have killed her hours ago. And somehow, impossibly, she was alive. She was alive, and she was not alone. The storm continued to rage, but Alara had stopped being afraid of it. She had found something more powerful than the chaos. She had found connection. The storm died with the darkness. Alara watched the green lightning fade from the sky as the first light of dawn crept over the crystal forest. The clouds that had threatened to kill her dissolved into wisps of violet mist that drifted between the singing trees, and finally, after hours of forcing sound through a throat that felt like it had been scraped raw with sandpaper, she fell silent. The quiet was almost painful after so long filled with music and thunder. Alara slumped against the ruined escape pod and closed her eyes, exhausted beyond anything she had ever experienced. Her broken arm throbbed with a dull ache that the pain medication could no longer touch, and her throat felt like she had swallowed fire. But she was alive. She had survived the night. Now she just had to survive whatever came next. Alara expected the predators to leave. The storm had passed, and the electromagnetic chaos that had driven them to her clearing was gone. They would return to their territories, to their hunting grounds, to whatever passed for normal life on this deadly world. She would be alone again, waiting for a rescue that might never come. But when she opened her eyes, the predators were still there. The stalkers had not moved from their positions around the clearing. The serpents remained coiled in their spiral pattern near the trees. The bear spider still sat 3 meters away, its massive body blocking the morning wind. They were all watching her with expressions she could not read, but that did not seem threatening. Alara stared back at them and waited for something to happen. One of the stalkers rose to its 6 legs and walked toward her. She tensed, her heart pounding despite everything that had happened during the night. Old instincts screamed at her to run, to fight, to do anything except sit still while a predator approached. But she did not move. The stalker stopped in front of her and lowered its head until those 8 alien eyes were level with her own. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, human and creature. 2 species that should have had nothing in common except a shared existence in an uncaring universe. Then the stalker made a sound. That same low rumbling she had heard when she touched it during the storm, and it pressed its head against her chest. Gentle as a lamb seeking comfort from its mother, Alara felt tears running down her face as she wrapped her good arm around the creature's neck. It was warm, so much warmer than she had expected, and its scales shifted under her touch like they were happy to feel her. "You are welcome," she whispered, though she knew it could not understand her words. "You are so welcome." "I was happy to help." The stalker pulled back and returned to its place at the edge of the clearing. But it did not leave. None of them left. Alara needed to find water, and her stream was visible from where she sat. A ribbon of silver cutting through the purple grass about 50 meters away. She tried to stand, and her legs almost gave out beneath her. Weak from hours of sitting in one position, while fear and adrenaline burned through her reserves. Two of the stalkers were at her side before she could fall. They pressed against her legs, supporting her weight with their bodies, and made soft clicking sounds that seemed encouraging. Alara laughed again. That same broken sound from the night before. "Are you helping me walk?" she asked. "Is that what this is?" They did not answer because they could not answer. But when she took a step toward the stream, they moved with her, matching her pace and keeping her steady. The bear spider rose from its position and followed behind them like an enormous bodyguard. Its footsteps made the ground tremble, but it kept a respectful distance. Close enough to respond to any threat, but far enough to not frighten her. They reached the stream, and Alara knelt to drink, scooping water into her mouth with her good hand while the stalkers stood watch on either side. The water was cool and clean and tasted faintly of minerals she could not identify. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. A sound from the forest made her look up. Something was pushing through the undergrowth. Something she had not seen during the night. It was smaller than the stalkers, but it moved with a quick, aggressive energy that spoke of hunger. One of the serpents rose from its resting place with a hiss that contained more menace than any sound Alara had heard. During the entire storm, the smaller predator froze the bear spider, took a single step forward, and made a noise like grinding stone. A warning that even Alara understood. The smaller creature turned and fled into the forest. So fast it seemed to blur. The serpent settled back down, and the bear spider returned to its position behind Alara like nothing had happened. They were protecting her. These creatures that should have torn her apart, that had every reason to see her as nothing more than food, were actively protecting her from other threats. Alara did not understand why. She was not sure she would ever understand why. But she knew that something had changed during that long night of singing and storm. She had given them something they desperately needed, and they were repaying that gift in the only way they knew how, by treating her as one of their own. She returned to the crash site with her unlikely escorts and found that someone or something had been busy while she was getting water. Her broken arm had been splinted with pieces of crystal bark wrapped in a fibrous plant material she did not recognize. The work was crude but effective, far better than the hasty job she had done with her medkit. One of the serpents was coiled near the pod, with fragments of bark and plant fibers scattered around it. It watched her approach with an expression that might have been pride or might have been nothing at all. "Did you do this?" Alara asked, holding up her newly splinted arm. The serpent made a soft sound and looked away like it was embarrassed by the attention. Alara sat down in the middle of her clearing, surrounded by predators who had become protectors, and wondered what she was supposed to do now. Rescue might come, or it might not. She might survive this world, or she might not. But whatever happened next, she would not face it alone. That was worth more than she could ever express. The rescue shuttle from the constellation descended through the violet clouds 41 hours after the Meridian had been destroyed. Captain Maria Chun stood at the head of a 12-person tactical team, all of them armed with the heaviest weapons the ship could provide, and all of them expecting to find nothing but scattered remains. Kethra's 4 did not leave survivors. That was what the record said, what every report confirmed, what every expert agreed upon without exception. No human had ever survived more than 6 hours on this planet's surface, and Dr. Alara Vance had been down there for nearly 2 days. They were here to recover a body, not a person. The shuttle landed in a clearing about 2 kilometers from the escape Pod's last known position, and the team moved. Out in tight formation, with weapons raised, and sensors scanning for any sign of the deadly predators that ruled this world. Remember your training, Chun said over the comm. These creatures are fast, intelligent, and utterly without mercy. If you see one, you shoot first and ask questions never. They pushed through the crystal forest in silence, each step bringing them closer to what they all assumed would be a grim discovery. The singing trees made sounds that set their teeth on edge, and the purple grass bent away from their boots like it was trying to avoid contamination. Then Sergeant Torres stopped so suddenly that the person behind him nearly crashed into his back. "Captain," Torres said, his voice strange and tight. "You need to see this." Chun moved to the front of the formation and looked at what had made her veteran sergeant freeze in place in the clearing ahead. Surrounded by the wreckage of an escape pod sat Dr. Alara Vance. She was alive. She was smiling, and she was surrounded by approximately 30 apex predators who were watching the rescue team with unmistakable territorial aggression. "Nobody move," Chun ordered, her voice barely above a whisper. Nobody even breathed too hard. The creatures were everything the reports had warned about, and worse, six-limbed. Stalkers with too many eyes formed a perimeter around the clearing like soldiers, guarding their general serpentine nightmares draped across warm rocks raised their feathered heads and hissed warnings at the armed humans, and behind Dr. Vance, curled around her like a living fortress, lay something so massive that Chun's mind had trouble processing its existence. It looked like what might happen if someone had described both a bear and a spider to an artist who had never seen either creature, and who also happened to be completely insane. Thing's armored head was larger than Chun's entire body, and it was watching her with dozens of small, intelligent eyes that held no fear whatsoever. "Captain Chun," Dr. Vance called out, her voice rough and damaged but unmistakably cheerful. "Please tell your team to lower their weapons. You are making my friends nervous." Chun stared at her. "Your friends?" she repeated slowly. "Yes," Dr. Vance said. "They kept me safe during the storm. They have been taking care of me ever since. I would prefer if you did not shoot them." One of the stalkers had risen from its position and was walking toward the rescue team with a gait that suggested it could close the distance and kill them all in about 2 seconds if it chose to. Torres raised his weapon, and the stalker stopped, its many eyes narrowing. "Sergeant, lower your weapon right now," Chun snapped. "Captain, with respect, these things are following her orders apparently," Chun interrupted. "Lower your weapon. That is a direct command." Torres obeyed with obvious reluctance, and the stalker relaxed slightly, settling back onto its haunches, but keeping its attention fixed on the armed human's doctor. Vance rose to her feet with help from 2 of the creatures who pressed against her legs to support her weight. She walked toward the rescue team, slowly and carefully, and the predators parted to let her pass while keeping themselves between her and any potential threat. "I know this looks insane," she said when she reached Captain Chun. "I know that everything you have ever read about this planet says these creatures should have killed me the moment the storm began. But something happened last night. Something I do not fully understand myself. What happened?" Chun asked. Dr. Vance smiled, and there was something in her eyes that had not been there before. A kind of wonder that made her look younger and older at the same time. "I sang to them," she said. "During the storm, when the electromagnetic chaos was driving them mad, I sang every song I could remember, and somehow it helped. Somehow it gave them something to focus on instead of the madness. And when the storm ended, they did not want to leave." She turned to look at the creatures who had gathered behind her. These deadly predators who had chosen to protect a single fragile human instead of tearing her apart. I think they have been waiting their whole lives for something like this, she said softly. Every storm that sweeps across this planet steals their minds, and they have never been able to do anything except endure it. But last night I gave them an anchor. I gave them something to hold on to. And they are not ready to let go. The bear spider had risen and was approaching, its massive body moving with surprising grace between the smaller predators. Chun's team raised their weapons instinctively, and the creature stopped, making a sound like grinding stone that was clearly a warning. "Put the weapons down," Dr. Vance said. "Please. She will not hurt you unless she thinks you are threatening me." "She," Chun repeated. "I have been calling her Maya," Dr. Vance said. "After my mother, against every survival instinct she possessed." Chun lowered her own weapon and gestured for her team to do the same. The bear spider Maya continued her approach until she was close enough that Dr. Vance could reach out and touch her armored face. The creature made a sound, low and rumbling and almost melodic. It sounded like she was trying to hum. "She has been trying to copy my songs all morning," Dr. Vance said, with a laugh that cracked at the edges. "I think in another few days she might actually manage it." Chun watched the deadliest creature on a death world nuzzle against a human woman like an oversized pet, and felt her understanding of the universe shift slightly on its axis. "What happens now?" she asked. "We came to bring you home." Dr. Vance was quiet for a long moment. "I will come with you," she said finally. "I need medical attention, and I need to report what happened here. But I am coming back." She looked at the creatures surrounding her, these monsters who have become her guardians. "I promise them," she said. "When the next storm comes, I will be here to sing them through it." They sat with me in the dark when I was terrified and alone, and listened to my voice until morning. That is more than most species would do for a stranger. The stalkers keened softly at her words. The serpents raised their heads, and Maya pressed her massive face against Dr. Vance's palm like she understood exactly what was being said. "I am not abandoning them," Dr. Vance said. "I will come back, and I will sing to them every night for as long as I live if that is what it takes." She turned to Captain Chun with tears streaming down her face. "Can you understand that?" she asked. "Can you understand why I have to do this?" Chun looked at the woman who had survived a death world by singing.